Hey, how's everybody doing today? It's Jake Reed coming at you guys with a little bit of an interesting video here for you today. Just something that I thought of off the top of my head that I had looked up online and couldn't find a lot of other videos similar to this or anything really giving me anything to go off of in terms of my connected franchise modes. In different games, including Madden 19. And so I figured I'd make a video on it for you guys today because, I've had a lot of ideas. I found a couple ideas online of ways to keep the franchise mode interesting. And I'm not talking about solo franchise mode here. I'm talking about connected franchise mode with your friends because it seems like there's a very limited number of ways that you can kind of keep those things interesting. They seem to usually go one type of way. You eventually get bored of it and then you move on to another game because maybe you played a franchise or two, you're a couple months into the game and you're just bored of it at this point. So I want to go through a couple things that I tend to do here, and I actually have one going on in the background here that I'm going to be starting with my friends here in a couple days. Just some ideas that I came up with and some things that we've done in the past to try and keep connected franchise mode interesting on Madden. And this one will be for Madden 19. So the first and probably most common method of playing connected franchise mode is just kind of you have a few roles to kind of keep things in line so that you're not cheesing the AI or anything, you're not making ridiculous trades and whatnot, and you just kind of play through the franchise. You play through it for a few years, and then eventually you come to a point where you're either bored or you want to start a new one or whatever. So that's the most basic way to do it. That's not going to keep things interesting. That's probably what you guys are doing right now. And actually, you'll probably be doing one of these first couple things that I say until we start getting into the more interesting things that you guys can do. Now, the second way to do this, and this is something that actually not a lot of people do, and I've actually heard a lot of people in the community didn't even think to do this, because it can be painstaking and it requires people to have a lot of discipline, and it requires somebody to really take charge and really, control what goes on, and a lot of people don't like that. But one of the funnest things that we've found to do, and actually this isn't necessarily my playstyle, but this is a couple of my friends, they like to do things super, super realistic. So, and I found it to be actually extremely interesting and extremely fun. So what you do in order to do this, and the way that you make it interesting and make it fun, is you come up with a really strict list of rules and regulations that keep you guys from doing anything outside the norms of the NFL. So a couple of those things would be like, we would have rules where, you limit trading in certain ways so that you get, maybe one trade at the deadline, and then possibly you get, 2 or 3 max trades during the offseason at a certain point, because it seems, for example, because it seems like in the NFL, a majority of the trading is done during the offseason and not too much during the regular season. As you can see right now that's going on in the NFL, we're in the 2018-2019 season, approaching the trade deadline, and only a couple of trades have happened so far. The Raiders have made a couple trades, and then the Giants just made a trade, and then actually they made 2 trades. So 2 teams made a couple trades. There hasn't been a lot. It doesn't happen that there's a ton of trades during the season. So we make rules where, for example, you get maybe 1 trade at the deadline and not everybody's going to use it necessarily. Or we make a rule where you trade out of necessity, or you have to justify why you're making this trade. And what I mean by that is that we played one of the leagues where people would have to come up with a very valid reason for why they're trading for a player. So say you're a team that's on the brink of the playoffs, I would go to the commissioner and say, I need to get this corner because this is the player that's going to push me over the edge. Right now, my pass defense is the weakest part of my team, and I'm on the brink of winning this division. So if I hope to win this division and I want to make a playoff push or a Super Bowl push, I need to add this player to my secondary, and that is why I'm going to make the trade. And so you would have to convince the commissioner of why the trade was realistic and why it would help your team in a certain way. And so there are many, many ways that you can do this and finagle this, and we came up with a very extensive list of rules as to ways to keep it interesting. I can just kind of go through a few of them now, and like one of the rules would be that if you just signed a player in free agency, you're not allowed to then trade that player in that next season. And what that is because you don't see that in the NFL. People don't. So what'll happen in a connected franchise is if a player has a ton of money, they'll just hoard all the players for draft capital, or sorry, for trade capital, and then you'll be able to trade those players away to get what you want in return. And that's not what happens in real life. And so we made a rule that if you sign a player, you have to stick with that player for at least a year and see if it works out, because that's what happens. Sometimes those players will then go ahead and get cut, they'll get traded. You know, very occasionally, very rarely, you will see instances where a player is signed and then traded away within, you know, the middle of the next season. And actually, there is one going on right now, and that was Carlos Hyde being traded from the Browns to the Jaguars. But, you know, that's not something typical, and that usually only happens with very, you know, typically incompetent teams, as I would say, like the Browns. So, because teams aren't going out there signing people to long-term deals to then have to trade them away to another team. If a team plans on signing a player, they're going to stick with them for a little while to see if they work out. So we made a rule that influenced that, and we basically played this to a T where, you know, you would have to play all your games. You try and make the sliders as realistic as possible to make scores realistic. You would try and make the entire franchise feel as realistic as possible. And I'm sorry that I'm not doing anything in the background here. I just am trying to talk through this with you guys, and I'll get to this in the background here, what I'm doing with this in a couple of topics from now. But I just wanted to say that's a really I wouldn't say easy, because it really takes discipline and dedication from everybody to say, okay, I'm going to play this realistic. I'm not going to go out, you know, the first thing I do when I get into the franchise is sign 100 free agents. You have to really say, okay, you know, this is the team in real life, and say you're starting the franchise right now, and, you know, what are we, 6-7 weeks into the season? You have to say, this is the roster that the team has. So I'm not going to go out and sign free agents. I'm not going to go out and do a bunch of trades. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play it as realistic as possible. And then I'm going to act like the franchise that I'm playing as. So, for example, I know a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Pittsburgh Steelers don't go out and make trades. They don't go out and sign a lot of free agents. They build through the draft. And so if you're that franchise, you would then say, you know, our understanding between all of us users is that we're going to go ahead and play as realistically to that franchise as possible. So if I'm playing as the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm not going to go out and make a ton of trades. Maybe occasionally I'll make a trade just to kind of keep things interesting, keep things fun, help out my team if I can justify it. And maybe occasionally I'll sign a player or two in the offseason, because that does happen even for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who don't like to make big moves or anything and build through the draft. But I'm going to focus on building through the draft. And then it would be different for other teams, but the goal in that is to make the franchise resemble an NFL season or an NFL, you know, franchise mode, an NFL organization as much as possible. And I find it to be an extremely fun way to play, but it does get heated at times, because there will be arguments between people as to, you know, what is needed, you know, what's not needed. You don't need this player, you don't need this player, blah, 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 blah. But when it comes down to it, it's a fun way to play. It's an interesting way to keep things fresh, to keep things from getting boring, to just kind of give you guys something new to do. So, so far we've kind of talked about, you know, the standard way to play, which is just, you know, there's a few rules. Keep things from getting ridiculous. Don't cheese the AI. Don't cheese other players. And actually, a lot of online franchises don't even play against the CPU. But I find that if you're going to make it realistic, you're going to play all your games, because otherwise you're going to be kind of missing out on some of what you can get out of the franchise mode. So, you know, that's tip number one on keeping the franchise mode interesting. Now, a couple other tips that I came up with, and I actually want to talk about what's going on in the background here, is you can do a fantasy draft. Now, a lot of people like to say, you know, fantasy drafts take too long. It's not fun because it takes so long, it takes so much time. But honestly, it really doesn't take that long. All you have to do is commit to drafting the players that you really care about. So if you were to do a franchise mode, you know, like you would pick these top players like, you know, Alvin Kamara, you would pick Luke Kuechly, Reuben Foster, Landon Collins, and maybe a couple others. And that's like, you know, 5, 6, 7 rounds worth of players, and then you can simulate the rest of it. And so doing a fantasy draft I find to be really interesting and really fun. However, the idea that I just came up with was, okay, some of my friends don't like sitting through an entire fantasy draft. So what if I do it completely at random? You know, I don't pick any players, nobody else picks any players, and I let it auto draft every single team by itself. And then we just pick a team that we like their uniforms and we want to maybe move a franchise or something in that line. You know, we want to make a fun story with the franchise. Like I decided to be Bill Gates with the Seahawks because Bill Gates is from Seattle. Bill Gates is, you know, the Xbox Microsoft owner, and that they're linked to the Seahawks, you know, all this different stuff. And so it's just, I thought it would be an interesting story to say Bill Gates took over the Seattle Seahawks. He completely revamped the organization. And then maybe in the future I'll decide to move them away, build a new stadium. You get the point. It's, you know, you get to be creative and just do whatever. And I find that to be extremely interesting and something completely different than what we've done in the past, because we're always doing just regular franchises, trying to compete with each other, trying to do the best that we can. But when you start to get away from that mindset of just, you know, pick a team and try and compete against each other, when you start to become a little bit more creative with these things, it's going to become a lot more interesting. And so what we decided to do is we decided to literally just let it completely be random. We're all just going to end up with a random team. We're going to have teams that have flaws here and there. And as you can see, my team has flaws. Parts of my O-line aren't good. I ended up with Blake Bortles at quarterback, which nobody is interested in. My best wide receiver is an 80, but they're young. So, you know, there's interesting ins and outs of this team. And this is a team I would have never have thought to put together on my own. It's just interesting to see the combination of players that the AI drafts together. So that's part of the fun in it in itself, is going around the league and kind of seeing who ended up where. You know, I'm a Steelers fan, and I found it interesting that Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell both ended up back on the Vikings. And then there's interesting things that happen, like players that end up right back on their own team. Dak Prescott ended up being the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys again. So it's interesting how these things tend to play out. And you know, it's to me very funny to see kind of some of these players together, you know, players that you would never think would be on these teams. And it's just, part of the fun is just going through the rosters and seeing who's who. And who got what. And what I think one of the most exciting things about this for me is none of my friends have joined into the franchise yet, and so none of them have actually seen their teams. So I think it's going to be fun seeing their reactions when they get in and see, oh, you know, I have, you know, I don't know, let me go through I have, for example, Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell on the Vikings with AJ Green and, you know, players like Adam Thielen. Like this is a pretty interesting offense. You know, I've Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, a couple OP wide receivers. So this is going to be interesting to kind of plan out the future around this. You know, I'll still have a good offense when Ben Roethlisberger retires, or, you know, a team like the Titans where you end up with the rookie quarterback and then you kind of have to find a way to build around him, because you know, you end up with Latavius Murray at running back. You don't really have many wide receivers, so you have a project, and it's random. It's totally random what everybody's going to get. And it's not like going in knowing what you're going to get, what you typically do with a franchise. Typically what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be the Browns because I want to do a rebuild, or I'm going to be the Jets because I want to do a rebuild, or I'm going to be the Rams because I just want to have a good team and I want to win. I want to beat everybody. I want to be really good and I want to have good players. Or, you know, I want to be the Patriots because I want to live out the rest of Tom Brady's career. The interesting thing about this is that you don't know what you're going to get. and you get to make up the story as you go. And so I ended up, I decided I want to be the Seahawks just because I wanted to be Bill Gates, and I wanted to see what kind of story I ended up with. And, I think it's going to be interesting to draft this, write the story of the rest of Blake Bortles' career. Can I turn him into a good quarterback? Is Kyle Lauletta going to have to come in and take over? Can Blake Bortles turn into a Pro Bowl type quarterback, or is he going to end up on the streets, basically? Can I turn some of these rookie wide receivers? And actually, I just noticed that I ended up with literally, this is just a ridiculous, young receiving squad here that I ended up with. Can I develop some of these players? Can I make do with a couple of, older offensive linemen that might be, heading to retirement soon? Can I, rebuild the Legion of Boom, per se, with players like Luke Kuechly and Reuben Foster and Sean Lee at linebacker? That's an absolutely crazy linebacking core. And then Landon Collins and Carl Joseph over the top. That was part of my goal coming into this, was like, okay, I'll pick the Seahawks. I want to be Bill Gates because of the ties to Seattle and the ties to the Seahawks and Microsoft and all of that stuff. And I think it'll be interesting to see if maybe I can rebuild the Legion of Boom from a random fantasy squad. See what I can do over time to make this team, whole again. And I think that that's completely fun and random to me. And then on top of that, I wanted to talk about something that we had done in the past that we decided to not do this time, because this was even taking it to a further step. I should step back for a second here and explain what we did before this last year. Last year we decided we were going to write down all of the users that we had on a piece of paper. So we had 10 to 20 users. This year we have less, but I think it was 18 or 19 users actually that we had, but we wrote everybody's name down on a piece of paper, and we had them listed out 1 through 20, and then we were just going to pick out of a hat the teams that those players were going to be. So we randomly assigned teams, and that's an interesting way to keep it fresh, because then at the very least you're making it random. There's no bias in who gets what team, and it's just a completely random assignment of teams, and everybody can be happy with the fact that that nobody's getting cheated in any way. It's luck of the draw, and every team has their strength and weakness. Even if you get one of the worst teams in the league, you're going to be able to have some of the best picks in the draft. And one of the nicest things about that this year, if you guys choose to go that route of randomly just assigning a team to everybody, is that you're actually going to have the draft class this year. So go download a draft class, and then those players that do get a crappy team are going to actually have a lot of fun with it, because they're going to have the real players to draft. So that's one of the more interesting things that you can do. And those are, they're not that hard to just randomize the teams or do a random fantasy draft and then invite everybody after. Those are very easy ways that you guys can go ahead and keep a franchise interesting. Now, I did want to talk about a couple more things that I had come up with that I couldn't, I didn't find online, and I was just brainstorming. It's like, it might be interesting if you could do something similar to this. So the next thing that I want to talk about is that you could do something where every user has to swap a player with another user of equal or lesser value at the beginning or the end of the season. It really doesn't matter timing wise. You can choose to do whatever you want, but I thought it was an interesting idea. So say, I'm forced to swap a player, and say maybe it has to be somebody over an 80, and you have to swap them for a player of equal or lesser value. Or it doesn't even have to be over an 80. But say, I have a player, and I'm like, okay, I have Mike Pouncey on my team, who's a 29-year-old 80 overall, and I have to swap that for a player of equal or lesser value. So then with another user. So I go to another user and I say, okay, well maybe it would be interesting to just kind of, it would shake up my team in a way, because there are users on here that like to build a dynasty, and then you have the same team for 10 years. And that's fun for some people. It's not fun for other people. So I think it would be interesting to kind of have it mixed up in a way that you're forced to change up your team a little bit, but you still get a choice in the matters. So say you even just have like 4 or 5 users, you're probably going to end up with 2 or 3 different players being swapped out on your team. And because of the fact that you have to trade for a player of equal or lesser value, the team, say somebody wants Marquise Pouncey off my team, what I'm saying is that they're going to have to give me a player of equal value or greater value because they're the one swapping to my team. So, you're never going to feel like you got cheated out of the arrangement, but you're going to feel a sense of, freshness or uniqueness to it because your team's going to be different every year. There's always going to be a couple players that you're going to have to adapt to. You're going to have to learn the way they play and learn how to use them. And I think that's an extremely interesting idea. We haven't talked about doing that necessarily, but one that we have talked about doing, and this will be my last talking point today. If you guys want to have more ideas, I have more ideas written down. I just didn't want to get too lengthy into the video here today. I would be happy to give you guys more ideas. I'd be happy to give you guys ideas on different franchise modes in different games. Anything you guys would like to see. So, if you like this video, leave a like on it. Comment down below what you would want to see. And hit the subscribe button for more. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about was that and this actually kind of plays into the idea of the realistic franchise mode, and you can do this in any franchise mode, whether it's realistic or not. But I said every single season, one random user-controlled player gets an indefinite suspension. And there's a very easy way to do this. All you do is you put all the players in order, and then you have Siri or the computer or just your phone in general pick a random number between the start and the end. So say you have 4 users. The first user's players will be 1 through 53, and then the second user's players will be 54 through 106, and so on. And then you have them pick a number between 1 and it would be 212 for 4 users, and say they pick number 20. Then you go to that player's team and you go to the roster and you go to the 20th player, and that person gets a year-long suspension. That person can't play that player. So you go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I wouldn't get to use Forest Lamp for an entire year. And you can make up the story with it. That's one of the funnest things about it, is when you start to get creative with franchise mode, that's when you really can start to enjoy it again after it has lost its touch, after having played it for a while and gotten bored with it or whatever. Forest Lamp went out and he was doing drugs and they tested him positive for drugs. He failed his drug test and he's got a year-long suspension. Vontez Burfict goes out and, illegally hits a couple people in the helmet and twists some ankles and gets a year-long suspension. Or, something along those lines. You make up your story for it, but in the end, it makes it interesting because I have to find a way to work around the fact that my starting right guard is then out for an entire season. So that's the last way I want to talk to you guys about just keeping things interesting in franchise mode in Madden 19. And you can definitely play with these ideas and do them differently. You don't have to do them exactly the way that I said. These are just baseline ideas to kind of get you guys thinking creatively, trying to help you guys out in terms of having fun with the game still, and having fun with your friends, having fun with your the people that you've met on PlayStation that you play Madden with, whether they're your friends or not. But that's basically it for today. I mean, You know, like I said, if you guys want any more ideas, I have a ton of them. There's not really any good videos anywhere or forums that really say, you know, unique ways to keep Madden interesting, keep franchise mode interesting. So I hope this helped you guys. I hope that I gave you guys at least some ideas or some motivation to go out there and try some new things. And in the end, if this helped you, please leave a like on the video. And like I always say, I will see you guys in the next one. Keep an eye out for my next video. I hope you guys have a good one. And actually, the weekend's coming up, so have a good weekend as well.